December 1943, Eastern Front. Soviet High Command was watching with growing confidence as a Guards mechanized column pushed through Ukrainian territory. Villages were being liberated daily. German units were retreating in disarray. The unstoppable Red Advance was threatening to completely breach Axis defensive lines in the region. The Germans made a calculated decision, set the perfect ambush. 40 Pak 43. 88mm anti-tank guns, the most lethal tank killer in the Wehrmacht arsenal, was secretly positioned along a 15-kilometer corridor. Each position camouflaged with surgical precision, every firing angle meticulously calculated, overlapping fields of fire, escape routes blocked. It was a steel trap waiting to snap shut. On paper, the Soviet column didn't stand a chance, 40 T-34s advancing straight into 40 concealed anti-tank positions. It should have been a massacre. What happened over the next 72 hours became a case study in how poor reconnaissance, overconfidence, and tactical rigidity can turn numerical superiority into catastrophic disaster. By the time the smoke finally cleared, over 35 Soviet tanks were destroyed or captured. The offensive was shattered, and the advance that seemed unstoppable had turned into chaotic retreat. This is the story of how meticulous German preparation crushed Soviet confidence, and why even excellent tanks become metal coffins when commanded without caution. If you want to understand how preparation defeats momentum, hit subscribe right now. First, you need to understand what made the T-34 so feared by the Germans. The T-34 medium tank was revolutionary, 26 tons of mobility and firepower, sloped armor that deflected rounds that would destroy conventional tanks, wide tracks that allowed movement through mud and snow where German panzers got stuck, and the 76mm gun that could punch through most German armor at reasonable ranges. German tank crews deeply respected the T-34. A single well-positioned T-34 could hold a critical intersection. The Panzer IIIs and IVs, backbone of German armored forces in 1943, were outmatched in mobility and protection. It often took 2 or 3 panzers to destroy a single T-34, and the Soviets would usually knock out at least one German tank before going down. The math was brutal for the Germans. T-34s won most direct engagements against German medium armor. Soviet propaganda made them legendary. German soldiers called them unstoppable. But T-34s had weaknesses that experienced German commanders understood better than many Soviets themselves. First, limited visibility. The T-34's hatches and periscopes offered restricted fields of view. Commanders often had to expose themselves outside the turret to see properly. This made them vulnerable to snipers and suppressive fire. Second, poor communication. Many T-34s didn't have radios. Commanders relied on flags and visual signals to coordinate. In chaotic combat, this coordination fell apart fast. Third, rigid doctrine. Soviet tanks operated under strict orders. Tank commanders had less tactical autonomy than their German counterparts. This meant Soviet formations were predictable, following established patterns even when situations demanded adaptation. Fourth, and most critical, dependence on momentum. T-34s fought best while moving, advancing aggressively, using speed and numbers to overwhelm defenses. But when forced to stop, when caught in restricted terrain, when facing prepared defenses, their advantages evaporated. The Germans knew all of this, and by December 1943, they were desperate enough to use that knowledge. Army Group South was retreating across Ukraine. Soviet offensives were gaining ground daily. Conventional defenses weren't working anymore. They needed something that could stop Soviet armor decisively. They needed to turn Soviet momentum into a trap, so they committed 40 of their best anti-tank guns, precious ammunition, and their most experienced crews to create an ambush the Soviets would never forget. It should have worked. It should have at least caused severe damage. It worked beyond their most optimistic expectations. While Soviet commanders were underestimating German defensive capability, a Wehrmacht colonel was meticulously planning their destruction. Oberst Klaus Becker had commanded anti-tank artillery since 1941. He'd fought at Moscow, Stalingrad, Kursk. He'd seen what T-34s could do, and more importantly, he'd seen how they could be beaten. Becker's approach to ambushing Soviet armor came down to 5 principles. First, control the terrain. T-34s depended on mobility and speed, so deny them that. Force them through narrow corridors where they can't maneuver. Use geography to nullify their advantages. Second, absolute camouflage. T-34s won when they could identify and engage targets first, so stay invisible until the perfect moment. A position revealed prematurely is a dead position. Third, overlapping fields of fire. An isolated anti-tank gun can be flanked, suppressed, destroyed. But multiple positions covering the same sectors mean T-34s face simultaneous threats from multiple directions. They can't respond effectively to all of them. Fourth, fire discipline. Don't shoot the first tank. Let the entire column enter the kill zone. Then simultaneously destroy the lead and rear vehicles, trapping everyone else in between. Turn numerical advantage into disadvantage. Fifth, have exit routes. After opening fire, positions will be identified. Soviet artillery will respond. Be prepared to reposition quickly, leaving dummy positions to fool counter-battery fire. Becker drilled these principles relentlessly into his crews. Anti-tank gunners couldn't fire without orders. Observers were instructed to remain invisible even when tanks passed within meters. Repositioning crews practiced moving entire guns in under 5 minutes. The result was that Becker's anti-tank units didn't just fight differently than other German formations, they hunted with the patience of predators. Early December 1943. The exact location remains classified in some Soviet records, but what happened is well documented. Soviet intelligence had identified an apparent gap in German lines. A route through low hills and sparse woods that would allow a deep thrust into German positions. Aerial reconnaissance showed no significant defensive concentrations. Ground patrols encountered no strong opposition. Soviet command ordered a mechanized column, 40 T-34s supported by motorized infantry, to exploit this apparent weakness. Advance quickly, penetrate deep, cause chaos in German rear areas. It was exactly what Becker was waiting for. His anti-tank positions were positioned along both sides of the route Soviet reconnaissance had identified. They weren't there by accident. Becker had deliberately made that route appear undefended. German patrols had intentionally pulled back. Obvious defenses had been removed. When Soviet forces advanced down the route, they encountered no initial resistance. This confirmed their assessments. The gap was real. They accelerated. The first T-34s entered the kill zone at 6:20 hours. Becker watched from a concealed position. 20 tanks inside the corridor. 30. The final vehicles still entering. At 0634, when the entire column was completely committed to the restricted terrain, Becker gave the order. 40 PaK, 43 guns opened fire simultaneously. What happened over the next 15 minutes was devastating. The 2 lead T-34s exploded immediately. Armor-piercing rounds punched through side armor at ranges of just 300 meters. The 3 rear tanks were targeted simultaneously. 2 were knocked out immediately. The third had its tracks destroyed, immobilizing it. The column was trapped. Tanks at the front blocked by burning wrecks, tanks at the rear prevented from retreating by destroyed vehicles, and from both sides, invisible German anti-tank guns poured precise fire. Soviet tank commanders tried to respond. But where to shoot? German positions were perfectly camouflaged. Muzzle flashes came from woods, ravines, collapsed buildings. By the time a T-34 identified a position, it had already repositioned, or a second position was hitting it from the flank. Some T-34s tried to push through the wreckage. They were engaged by multiple positions simultaneously. Some tried to maneuver laterally off the road. They got bogged down in muddy ground or were channeled into pre-designated sectors where even more guns waited. The motorized infantry suffered equally. Armored transports were targeted. Infantry dismounting was suppressed by machine guns positioned specifically for that purpose. Within 15 minutes, 18 T-34s were destroyed or severely damaged. The formation was shattered. Coordination had collapsed. Individual tank commanders were making desperate decisions without central communication. And here's the crucial part. All of this happened before Soviet command even knew there was a problem. Radio communication was limited. By the time messengers reached command reporting the ambush, half the column was already destroyed. Soviet command responded as doctrine dictated. Artillery was called to bombard suspected German positions. But without precise coordinates, the shelling mostly hit empty areas. The few German positions that were hit had already repositioned as planned. Air support was requested. But December weather and cloud cover made air operations impossible. The surviving T-34s were on their own. Some tank commanders tried desperate tactics. A group of 5 T-34s coordinated a direct charge at suspected German positions. 3 were destroyed before they reached 100 meters. The 2 survivors retreated. Another commander tried using smoke to cover a withdrawal. But Becker had anticipated this. Anti-tank positions were positioned to cover multiple exit routes. T-34s trying to retreat through smoke emerged directly into new fields of fire. The second day was worse. Surviving T-34s tried to consolidate defensive positions, waiting for reinforcements. But they were stuck in terrain Becker had specifically chosen. German anti-tank guns could target them from multiple directions without significant exposure. Soviet reinforcements trying to reach the trapped column were ambushed by secondary anti-tank positions Becker had established exactly for this purpose. 6 more T-34s destroyed before they even reached the main column. During the night of the second day, Soviet command finally ordered a full withdrawal. But retreating under fire in restricted terrain with shattered coordination proved as costly as the initial engagement. T-34s trying to retreat faced all the same problems that had destroyed them on the advance. They were slow in difficult terrain. German positions were faster at repositioning. Retreating T-34s were hit from behind where armor was weakest. They needed fuel. But supply trucks were destroyed by German artillery that now knew exactly where the column was. Some T-34s ran out of fuel during the retreat and were abandoned by their crews. They broke down mechanically. The stress of prolonged combat, constant movement through difficult terrain, non-catastrophic combat damage, it all took its toll. T-34s with damaged transmissions, broken tracks, failing engines littered the retreat route. And through all of this, Becker's anti-tank positions never let the pressure relax. German artillery hammered retreat routes. Anti-tank guns harassed the flanks of any Soviet formation trying to establish a rear guard. This was Becker's approach in action. Never let the enemy recover. Never give them time to regroup. Press constantly. Make retreat as costly as defense. One Soviet officer captured afterward told interrogators, "We expected resistance. What we got was systematic annihilation. Your forces never gave us a chance to organize an effective response." That was the genius of Becker's approach. He understood that T-34s were most dangerous when mobile and aggressive, so he made sure they were never mobile, never aggressive, always reacting, always under pressure. When the surviving T-34s finally managed to withdraw beyond Becker's immediate area of operations, the count was devastating. Of the 40 T-34s committed to exploit the apparent gap in German lines, only 4 returned operational. The rest, 36 tanks, destroyed in combat, abandoned due to mechanical failure, captured by German forces, or blown up by their own crews to prevent capture. The offensive that was supposed to penetrate deep into German positions was shattered. The route that had seemed promising revealed itself as a death trap. So what went wrong? How did a force of 40 capable tanks fail so completely against static anti-tank positions? The answer reveals fundamental truths about warfare that go way beyond just World War II. Reconnaissance beats surprise. T-34s were excellent machines, but excellent machines don't compensate for inadequate intelligence. Soviet reconnaissance failed to identify German preparations because the Germans invested enormous effort in camouflage and deception. Preparation trumps improvisation. Becker's anti-tank positions weren't set up casually. Every position was planned, every field of fire calculated, every contingency anticipated. The Soviets advanced based on quick assessment. The Germans fought based on meticulous preparation. Coordination determines effectiveness. Individual T-34s were powerful, but without effective communication, without ability to coordinate, they became isolated targets instead of a coherent force. Terrain is decisive. Becker chose where to fight. He forced the Soviets into terrain that favored anti-tank defense. He denied them the mobility that was their greatest strength. When you control the terrain, you dictate the terms of battle. Rigid doctrine is fatal. Soviet commanders followed established procedures even when the situation demanded adaptation. They advanced when they should have reconnoitered. They persisted when they should have withdrawn. Tactical rigidity turned a tactical problem into an operational disaster. The fundamental problem was doctrinal. The Soviets had designed T-34 tactics for offensive battles, advancing aggressively, using momentum and numbers to overwhelm defenses. They were using T-34s exactly in the role they were designed for, but Becker's preparation was so complete that the offensive battle never materialized. By the time the T-34s were positioned to attack, they were already surrounded, targeted, being systematically destroyed. The battle the Soviets wanted to fight never happened. This is why Becker succeeded where other German defenses failed against T-34s. Other defenses fought the battle T-34s were designed for: mobile engagements, maneuver warfare. Becker refused to fight that battle. He fought a battle of ambush, coordinated fire, and controlled terrain. A battle where T-34 advantages didn't matter and their weaknesses became fatal. The destruction of the T-34 column had strategic implications beyond just the tactical defeat. Soviet command had committed significant force based on assessment that the route was weakly defended. The complete failure of this operation forced a re-evaluation of intelligence and reconnaissance. It also demonstrated that apparently easy advances could be elaborate traps. It reinforced among Soviet commanders that even with superior tanks, German preparation and anti-tank positions had to be respected. When Soviet intelligence identified Becker's anti-tank units in a sector, commanders knew they couldn't rely on numerical or technical superiority. They needed complete reconnaissance, or they needed to find a different route. For German forces, the battle proved that well-prepared ambushes could defeat Soviet armor. Not easily, not without cost. Becker lost 7 PaK-43 guns, destroyed by counterfire, but consistently if you used adequate preparation and maintained fire discipline. Soviet tank crews who had relied on T-34 superiority learned caution. Not through better tanks, the T-34 remained an excellent machine, but through respecting that even excellent tanks become coffins when commanded recklessly. 40 T-34s, the best Soviet armored weapon in 1943, sent to exploit a gap in German lines. Only 4 survived. This wasn't a miracle. This wasn't luck. This was the result of meticulous preparation, tactical discipline, and a commander who understood that patience and planning could defeat superior technology. The T-34s failed not because they were bad tanks. They were excellent tanks. They failed because they were used in battle against an enemy who refused to fight on their terms. Becker's lesson is timeless. When facing a powerful enemy, don't fight where they're strong. Change the nature of the battle. Use preparation, patience and precision to create situations where their advantages don't matter. The Soviets sent their best tanks to exploit a perceived weakness. What they discovered is that the best tanks in the world don't matter if your enemy refuses to fight the battle you expected. The gap was closed, and Becker was already planning the next ambush. What do you think made the difference? German preparation or Soviet mistakes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories about how planning beats momentum, subscribe now. See you next time.